This video is about a question that I wondered about for a long time without having a clear idea of how to answer it. What is the longest word in the English language? Now, you can actually find a lot of answers to this question, which is precisely the problem. In fact, there's sort of an unofficial official answer to it. English doesn't have an Académie Française officially defining the language, but it does have a source that is widely regarded as the best and most complete authority on words, the Oxford English Dictionary. A massive historical dictionary which contains 273,000 head words, the root form of a word, and over 600,000 word forms, and purports to be comprehensive. It's so huge that the third edition was started in 2000 and isn't expected to be finished until 2037. So, if you want to know what is the longest word in English, the closest thing you can get to an official answer is the longest word in the Oxford English Dictionary. And that word is pneumono-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. So, that's it? Question answered? If it were that easy, I wouldn't be making a video about it. You see, there's one big problem with pneumono-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. This isn't a real word. Hang on here. Am I disagreeing with the Oxford English Dictionary? Yes, I am. Officially, pneumono-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis is the name of a disease. It most literally means a lung disease caused by the inhalation of extremely fine particles of volcanic dust. But it wasn't coined by a doctor or a scientist. It was coined by the president of the National Puzzlers League in 1935 as the new longest word recognized in their word puzzles. Unfortunately for these word puzzle moguls, this doesn't actually work as a word. And it doesn't work because it actually doesn't follow the rules for word formation in the English language. Let's look at the parts of it. Pneumono-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis is derived from pneumonoconiosis, which is a real medical term. It means any lung disease caused by dust inhalation. Pneumono means pertaining to the lungs, and coniosis means a disease caused by dust. The better-known silicosis and asbestosis are subsets of pneumonoconiosis. So far, so good. Ultramicroscopic, as opposed to just microscopic, is also a real term. It means something that's too small to see with a light microscope. It's just not used as much since the invention of the electron microscope. The problem is that it's a complete word, not a prefix. If you construct the word in this way, it naturally breaks into two words. The prefix form of ultramicroscopic is actually much shorter. It's just ultramicro. Next, we have silico, pertaining to silica dust, and volcano. Well, volcano is also a complete word. This one was harder to figure out because volcanic is also a whole word, but after digging through Wiktionary for a while, there were a handful of clear instances of volcano rather than volcanic being used as a prefix, most notably volcaniclastics and volcanogenic. So either volcani or volcano is valid, but volcani seems to be more appropriate for noun forms, which this is, as opposed to adjectives. Also, there are other sources of silica dust out there, meaning volcana is modifying silico rather than the reverse, so it should go first. Oh, and also most volcanic dust is microscopic, not ultramicroscopic. Put it all together, and if there were such a word, it would probably be pneumono-ultramicrovolcanosilicoconiosis, which at 39 letters would still be the longest word in the OED unless I've missed something. But again, it's not a real word. Now, what is a real word? Well, that's subjective, and there are people who have larger criticisms of the OED regarding their definition too. But I can tell you what I think it's not. I argue that if a word's only usage is as an example of a long word, it doesn't count as a word. And note that I very deliberately worded this definition in descriptivist terms. In other words, I'm interested in how words are used in practice, usually by lay people. Even if the word has a dictionary definition, If it's only used as a generic long word, then it lacks any semantic meaning, and it's really only being used as a placeholder. Importantly, a word doesn't have to be invented for this to happen, although it mostly applies to invented words. If a word has lost its original meaning, it can also fall into this category. That'll be important in a minute. And we can make the same distinction for technical terms. Some of you might have thought about certain chemical names when I asked the question. But there can be real and fake technical terms too. It's true that in chemistry you can construct arbitrarily long words by stringing different roots together, but any molecule you do that for is going to have a shorter name that's used by the actual chemists, so that doesn't count. I'm going to consider a technical word real only if it appears in actual scholarly literature. So what is the longest real word in the English language? Well, that's a little complicated because there are so many of these made-up words out there that have found their way into dictionaries. For example, when I first asked the question, you may have answered supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. This is in some dictionaries. Interjection, a word said when one doesn't know what to say. But of course, that word was made up for the movie Mary Poppins. Or, if you dig a bit deeper, there's hippopotamomonstroso-sesquipedaliophobia, the fear of long words. But, much like pneumono-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis, this word was made up to sound longer than it really is. In a clinical context, the correct form of the word would be sesquipedalophobia. Or you might say the longest word is flaxenausenihilipilification, the act or habit of estimating something as worthless. This does see some rare use, including from politicians who seem to use it just to emphasize a point. But this one was also made up, apparently by boys at Eton in the 18th century who mashed together a bunch of Latin roots to make a nonsense word that just happens to be one letter longer than another popular answer, anti-disestablishmentarianism. And if you said anti-disestablishmentarianism, well, that's probably the standard answer. Anti-disestablishmentarianism is probably the longest non-scholarly word in English that wasn't made up just to be a long word. It means the political position opposed to dismantling, or disestablishing, a state-run church, historically the Church of England. But remember what I said about having to be used as a real word. This is the one that causes problems, because have you ever, in your life, used anti-disestablishmentarianism except as an example of a really long word? Probably not. Did you even know what it means? Maybe, but it's not really relevant. It's not something that comes up much these days, and even if it did, you probably wouldn't use the exact word. If a political candidate somehow ran an ad advocating that position today, they would probably just say they were anti-disestablishment. So even though it has a dictionary definition and wasn't made up, it's not used as a real word. So what is the longest word? I'll look at technical and non-technical words separately. For technical terms, it's relatively simple. The longest one I could find was laryngotracheobronchopneumonitis. This is an actual medical term, as in, unlike pneumono-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis, it's actually printed in medical journals. It means a severe form of croup associated with inflammation of the larynx, trachea, bronchial tubes, and lungs. But laryngotracheobronchopneumonitis has a different problem. It's not in most dictionaries. In fact, in the first page of Google results, only your dictionary includes it. I don't know if it's in the OED because you need a subscription to see their word list. That doesn't really matter because, again, it's in medical journals, so it counts. But if this word isn't in most dictionaries, how did I even find it? Well, the answer to that is the real reason I made this video. My real question when I started this whole thing was, what is the longest word in the English language that's actually used as a word by lay people? And that's complicated to figure out. As far as I can tell, laryngotracheobronchopneumonitis is the longest scientific or technical term in use, but it's not going to be used by lay people. I'm not the first person to ask this question. One computer search by keyboard maker Maltron found that the longest English word in, quote-unquote common use was the 20-letter uncharacteristically. More recently, and the inspiration for this video, was Abacabba's video on the frequency of English words, which broke them down by length. That video didn't list any words longer than 20 letters, but it linked a data source that did. Abacabba's video used a word list compiled by Peter Norvig, the then director of research at Google. He compiled his list using Google Ngrams, a compilation of word frequency data from, where else, Google Books. Incidentally, the longest non-technical word on his list was a tie between the 22-letter deinstitutionalization and counter-revolutionaries. The thing is, his list only included words with more than 100,000 mentions in Google Books, for a little under 100,000 words total. And that is not the whole of the English language with its 600,000 word forms. Ideally, I wanted to use the OED's 600,000 word list directly, but again, you need a subscription for that, so I had to look elsewhere. I eventually found the word lists of Keith Virtanen of Michigan Tech. He compiled 12 English word lists together, taken from various sources from Wiktionary to the Enron email corpus of all things. Half of them were 400,000 words apiece. Even these were listed as the top 400,000 words, so they still weren't necessarily complete, but the full set that appear on at least one list totaled 1.5 million putative words, so I thought I wasn't going to get anything better than this. Sorting the list by length was easy, and from there I started by just separating out all the words that were at least 20 letters long. That cut it down to less than 4,000. Sifting out all the junk from the list was a lot harder. These are not official word lists. Many of them were compiled from web crawlers, Usenet groups, and email networks. They're riddled with misspellings, spam, web addresses parsed as words, and even random banging on the keyboard if it's statistically common enough to show up. And I should warn you, kids, do not try this at home. The raw data here are not family-friendly. Since so much of this word list was trawled from the internet, it turned up a lot of uncomfortable false positives. Any long, continuous string of letters will show up if it's used enough times. For example, the phrase, hot singles in your area, would be parsed as a 20-letter word by a web crawler or email sorter, even though it's really just blatant tag spamming. Now, as it turns out, that one actually doesn't appear on the list, but I use it as an example because the ones that did were much worse. Demonetization would be the least of my worries if I went there. So just stick with me. I filtered out all that junk so you don't have to. After I cut out all the false positives, and some foreign words that got swept up in the list, and the invented words, I had about 1,500 valid English words left. Then there were the technical terms, which were about 80% of them. In fact, nearly half of the words of 25 letters or more were chemical names alone, and a lot of the rest were medical terms. And this is where I found that the longest technical term was the 32-letter laryngotracheobronchopneumonitis. If you also cut out that stuff, the longest non-technical English word remaining is a tie between anti-transubstantiationalists and, of course, anti-disestablishmentarianism. But we already discarded anti-disestablishmentarianism as no longer being in its original usage. And I think anti-transubstantiationalists barely counts. It's not technical per se, but it's still an obscure piece of religious jargon. It means people who disagree with the doctrine of transubstantiation in the Catholic Church. The main thing it has going for it is that it isn't widely used as an example of a long word, but it's still obscure enough that I want to keep looking down the list. Now, what defines not obscure is going to be subjective. We started with the 20-letter uncharacteristically being the longest common word, but the 22-letter deinstitutionalization is one that will be fairly well known to people, as it has been a subject of political debate in the United States. This, of course, was the longest non-technical word on Peter Norvig's word list, but if you look at Keith Virtanen's word list, you can find a couple of 23-letter words that would probably be recognizable to many people, like over-intellectualization and subcompartmentalization. Amusingly, Doctor Who's Raxacoricofallapatorius was also widely used enough to show up on the list. However, if we look at the longest word in the English language that maybe isn't used that much, but is not invented, and that people would recognize as not being technical or jargon, I think the winner is a tie between two 25-letter words: trans-institutionalization and, perhaps fittingly, super-incomprehensibleness. These are the longest non-technical words in the English language as it is used in practice.